It came up to speak of inquiry and the variety of ways that we can play and practice inquiry. The most traditional way that we usually look at inquiry is something that's along the lines of a singular focus. Using the traditional "who am I?" That is basically pointing toward asking this question. Whatever thoughts arise, whatever pieces seem to come up, we notice those and then we move back to the question, who am I? Another thought, who am I? Another answer, who am I? So on and so forth. A focused, potent, singular attention, which has a very powerful effect. Yet, just like anything else, these things can quickly become a fixation. And so the introduction of some more aspects of inquiry here may provide useful for some of you who have potentially run into a wall when it comes to inquiry. And some teachers or pointers will say to continue sticking with the inquiry at hand as long as possible, especially if there's a wall. And there's absolutely some value to that. Yet this is a video to introduce some more aspects to inquiry because there is quite a variety of inquiry that can be experimented with and played with. That singular aspect of inquiry can sometimes lead to a vacuum of thought. In fact, some people, when they first begin to ask inquiry of who am I, where am I, whatever these inquiries are, the mind just stops, or it slows down to the point where thoughts are imperceptible and the experience is just this. That can be a very powerful tool. Ultimately, though, inquiry does tend to reach a threshold if we are doing it in a singular manner. And so in this video, we'll explore some other places that inquiry can discover, some other explorations or experiments with inquiry. Ultimately, inquiry is simply just an engagement with curiosity. And yes, we're using thought while exploring an inquiry, but sometimes we will find that even curiosity itself has an inquiring manner to it. It is something that is pointing toward layers that want to be unpeeled. And so let's play with that a little bit. In the space of who am I, and if answers continue to arise and we just remain here and ask again, who am I, and another answer arises, we sometimes can find ourselves in a space of what can feel like maybe a deep samadhi. And that can be a very potent and powerful experience. Yet what many of you probably already realize is that samadhi itself is a sense of an observer, one who is peaceful, one who is in an open space. So to go deeper, we can begin to play with other aspects of inquiry. Ultimately, there must be a diligence when we are practicing any of these things. A diligence of engagement is really what we are pointing to. So this isn't an invitation to constantly shift inquiry and constantly do something else necessarily. Although sometimes intuition brings it up to go with that which is making an appearance. So there's quite a few paradoxes here. There's quite a few contradictions along the way. We will do the best we can to discover these things together. So another way we can play with inquiry is if we ask the question to essentially follow the breadcrumbs that arise. This is another type of engagement with curiosity that can also very quickly lead to a space that feels free of thought. Or maybe there are thoughts, but they seem so distant. And it will look something like this. Who am I? And then maybe the answer comes up, my name is Jacob. Who is Jacob? And the answer comes up, hard worker. What is a hard worker? And then the answer comes up, one who puts a lot of energy and attention into work. What is a lot of energy and attention? So on and so forth. Every once in a while, following these types of breadcrumbs will quickly lead to a space of rapid shifting appearances, an immediacy, a spontaneity in what seems to be experienced. That is exactly where curiosity wants to go. That is really getting close to this paradox of the blinking of everything and nothing over and over and over, and we just allow ourselves to fall into that reality. Hopefully you're following along. I know this can be confusing to the mind. It can be hard to grok this, so to speak. Yet ultimately what we're really looking at here is complete engagement and immersion with what is, just like that. And sometimes these appearances will reveal themselves if we just follow these breadcrumbs, if we follow the white rabbit, so to speak. So that form of inquiry, we could almost say, is a zooming out, or it is a multiple focus approach. The singular focus, like a monk looking at the flame on a candle, that has a very potent power to it. Yet it doesn't always reveal a lot for everyone. It can sometimes become its own fixation. And so if we find ourselves through a cycle of inquiry, maybe waiting a couple of weeks, a month, focusing on a single inquiry and then shifting that to the next, so on and so forth, the method of singular focus may be a fixation. So from here, we begin to experiment with this multiple focus approach. We could almost look at it as a zooming in and a zooming out. And without introducing another term, the best way to describe this is dynamic fractalization of appearance or experience. A dynamic fractalization as we zoom in is we never actually can reach a platform or a center. As we seem to get closer, the fractalization of this experience begins to seemingly expand. We could also look at it the other direction, the zooming out of experience. Also dynamically fractalized. Maybe it's an appearance of things somehow getting smaller, but that doesn't seem to end. It is an endless journey. And then another paradox arises. Well, what's the difference between zooming in and zooming out? Ultimately, nothing. Yet, if we've been zooming in and we've been highly singular, sometimes that becomes a fixation, and it can be easily co-opted in low-level thoughts. So we can also play with, which is essentially the same approach, but from moving things from a distance, a zooming out, a multiple focus approach. And ultimately, what that looks like is spontaneity, something that is immediate and unpredictable. And we can find ourselves quickly lost in that experience. And even if there feels like there's a sense of us observing this, this is where it seems like the fireworks that we speak of tend to arise in the multiple focuses. Ultimately, though, this is singular. This is all singular, but not singular as opposed to something else that is singular on its own, and that is really impossible to speak of. We cannot put that into words. It has to be experienced through something that's very akin to a sensational experience. This particular video won't really look at sensations alone or sensations as a focus. Instead, this is more about looking at how these dynamic fractalizations of these experiences show up as this emptiness to form, to emptiness to form, emptiness to form. This type of inquiry can reveal quite a bit. And when I'm pointing to revealing, it's not quite an insight that can necessarily be held onto. Instead, it is to be taken away from the constructs of reality, the constructs of these thoughts to beliefs to identity, so on and so forth. So that multiple focus approach is kind of like a zooming out. Another way we can look at a zooming out for inquiry is to look at thoughts, and as thoughts arise, see if we can perceive the thought away from the content. The thoughts are actually experts at having us almost automatically zoom into the content. And that's where they seem to become sticky. So maybe as a thought arises, we have a sense of zooming out from the thought. And we have a sense of being able to see what's on the periphery of thought. And maybe we see the thoughts in a group, something linear, however it wants to appear. And we continue to zoom out. And maybe we begin to have a perception of thoughts arising from nothingness and somehow dissolving right back into that sense of emptiness. That zooming out can be quite useful because sometimes these experiences that are singularly focused actually draw us into a way that we are rejecting other aspects of this reality. It can give us a very potent sense of separation. Zooming out sometimes can reveal that what we thought once was separate or had a sense was separate is definitely not so. This can also work when we move into emotions or sensations. And the pointing here is whatever is arising or seems to be arising, that is true. We do not bypass it. We do not resist. We do not avoid. So if an emotion, like let's just say sadness, arises, we go to that space where it seems there is sadness. Even if there's a thought there, we don't need to reject it. This is the best pointing for life as the best teacher. What is immediate and what is unfolding and what is seemingly real is where we are at every point. This is what full engagement looks like. And so we go to that space. Let's say sadness arises. We can feel something in the body. We move to that space and then we begin to play with paradox. This is another aspect of what seems to be a dynamic fractalization, the paradox of the sensation. What in this sensation is not sadness? What else is here? Can be an inquiry we ask. This is looking at all appearances and all experiences outside of what seems to be the truth, because these truths, these experiences are still one-sidedness as a separation from other. Ultimately, this is a complete realization that there is no separation because there is no other. And so let's say we go there and something else arises. Maybe there's a sense of pleasure. Maybe there's a sense of something else within that sadness. That is a wonderful way to entertain the inquiry of this appearance or this experience. And we continue to go deeper. So now we're doing a little bit of a zooming in while also playing with the paradox. We pierce the veil of sadness. We allow ourselves to deeply penetrate into the individual or maybe the group of sensations that seems to be present, and we go there. And as we're there, maybe there's a sense of something more fundamental. This is a contraction, or this hurts. Let's look at the contraction first. Once we're at the contraction, we can begin to ask questions along the lines of, where in this is there something other than contraction? Where in this is something that is free from contraction? Where in this is something that feels released? And maybe something begins to arise there. That is playing with the paradox of experience. We can even go deeper, keep zooming in. Maybe it has a texture or a color. Where is this not colored red? Where is this not textured like sandpaper? Those particular forms of inquiry begin to reveal that this is just not a one-sided experience. It is the nature of the mind to have a fixed position, a singular, experienced, as opposed to other. That will begin to reveal a little bit more. And inversely, playing with that paradox and dynamic fractalization, if you will, we can also zoom out. So let's say you move into what seems to be sadness. Pull out a little bit and then look at maybe the entire body. Where in this experience is there not sadness here? Where in this experience is sadness not isolated here? Where in this experience is there something paradoxical? Ultimately, we could just introduce this as an inquiry. Where is the paradox here? And I know that can sometimes trigger an intellectual pursuit. That is really not what we're doing here. Although, if you notice that, then you can begin to inquire in a different way. Ultimately, what we want to do is allow this to reveal itself and for us to be with it as it is, exactly as it is. That's why the sensational space can be so powerful, because it does seem as if these sensations are moving, dynamic, changing all the time in so many different types of characteristics. And as we are immersed and engaged in that experience, we begin to see that that somehow applies to this sense of everything, this singular space of this. It's transitionary. It's training wheels for thisness. And we could say there's a transition from the head to the body to the I am space, the universal space, the space of God, however you would like to term that. It's a great space to play, but it's not the only thing. We can play with periphery. We can play with boundaries. Another way to look at inquiry is simply, where is the boundary of this experience? Is this actually broken up into pieces? And if it is, can I find the separation between one piece and another piece? That can show up as sound. It can show up in the visual field. It can show up definitely in the sensational space in the body, in the emotional core, so to speak. Yet ultimately, playing with boundaries begins to give us a sense that most of us will experience something that feels like a gradient. And let's say we go to a sensation here. Okay, it feels warm. Follow that sensation and see if you can find a space somewhere in the body, maybe initially, where there isn't warmth. Now move to that space. As you're doing so, maybe you're zooming in to find more and more of a boundary there. That would be dynamic fractalization as a zooming in. Inversely, the zooming out of that experience can be like, where is there not warm as you zoom out? And then sometimes people have the experience of, as I zoom out, everything is warm. This is where we begin to lose a sense of reference, a sense of otherness in this experience. And to be immersed in that, quite a powerful insight, quite a potent agent begins to arise. These types of inquiry can all be useful. And I know they point a little bit more toward curiosity, but ultimately, all inquiry at its most fundamental level is simply observation. And that is what we could call the observer space. The observer space is a very powerful place to be, but it can also become a fixation. To sit in the observer space and to continue to allow inquiry and curiosity to take us, we may quickly and effortlessly lose a sense of one observing and somehow become that which is making an appearance, that which is expressing, that which is this experience. Ultimately, it's just this. And not us with this right here. It can be felt. It can be sensed. It's something way beyond anything we can put into a cause and effect manner, anything that we can retrieve in terms of an intellectual mind. Maybe you can play with some of these inquiries. Maybe you can experiment a little bit with the dynamic fractalization of zooming in and zooming out, but also really approach the paradox, because this is paradoxical. And it's so strange to have this relative reality of seeming forms and objects and this absolute reality. It seems like two separate things, but we find out it's just all one same experience. Maybe this is the power of what we could just call the Trinity, the number 3. It's not this, it's not that. It's both and neither, this third space, so to speak. This may provide some access for you in that third space. Maybe it shows up as sensation, maybe it shows up as something else. But the curiosity itself can quickly take us away from what feels like a center. We somehow begin to dissolve and become obliterated in the experience. Sometimes that comes with a sense of shadow work, other times not. This is the benefit of these different angles of inquiry. So hopefully this particular video wasn't too challenging, too contradictory, too paradoxical for you, and it will give you a little bit more of some tools to play with. Ultimately, it would behoove you to avoid a fixation with a practice. The practice can sometimes become the largest barrier along the way. This is quite spontaneous. This is quite random and immediate. And it just won't fit the frame of the construct of what our reality seems to be. That's a pretty powerful indication that we are present. And somehow, nothing is lost. somehow the tool, the mind, the cause and effect machine remains, yet more as a tool than as a driver of experience. That can be quite powerful sense of equanimity there. So just see what comes up. See what it's like to play with the zooming in, the zooming out, the playing with the paradoxes, and see if you can notice how this is all seemingly fractalized and seemingly endless. And as always, go ahead and leave some comments and questions in the comments below, and I would love to engage.